Pleasure to meet y'all at last, and welcome back to films I should have talked about years ago. And in this particular case, let's go ahead and take a little trip back to the year 2006. This film is certainly, quite possibly, one of the craziest pieces of satire, crime, drama that I might have ever set my eyes on. Alpha Dog. This film is actually loosely based off of the real life events surrounding two different sides fighting against one another. A junkie who of course refuses to pay off a particular dope supplier, who then kidnaps the customer's younger sibling and ends up keeping this person along until they end up getting the money. But unfortunately, whenever the police got involved, they would then have to bring out the big guns. They go as far as to killing off the poor child. Of course, this may have been a real life event that happened way back in the day, but Alpha Dog does give us quite a big look at what it truly was like. It certainly is quite a big, gritty show about the true story of Johnny Truelove. And not to mention, the fact is that, well, this film really takes it up a notch with the satire, with the drama, with the crime, with all that good stuff. It certainly is like many others of the time where even to this very day we still have some rather unbelievable pieces of work out there that even I cannot even trust my own eyes and ears how they somehow get away with this stuff. But of course, let's just say that Alpha Dog does have a lot of merits in its own right that really help it set itself apart from many others. Mainly for the fact that it does star an actual good amount of actors in there, like Anton Yelchin, Justin Timberlake, Emil Hirsch, even Bruce Willis and Sharon Stone, pretty much. I mean, that's a pretty decent cast for the most part. If I could name off a lot of people in there that were involved, then you know that we are having a lot of great times right here. But I still do have yet to pretty much go through a lot around here. The premise itself, well, like I said, it is based on a real life story that essentially happened. The murder of a teenager that took place over a bit of a rivalry taking place between junkies and dope suppliers, in a way. Johnny Truelove is the leader of a group of suppliers who take out drugs to certain people out there. And when the fact is that Jake Mazursky is one of those junkies who ends up having a full-time job, but then eventually has a serious problem going on with the payments. But what makes matters worse is that Mazursky ends up getting called in to the boss's office and eventually gets fired for supposedly having drugs and other things that take place. I tell you, that one scene alone that happens in the boss's office between Mazursky and the boss in the office, I mean, that is unbelievable. Like, how did they get away with that kind of physical stuff? I mean, the fight that breaks out between Jake and the boss, I mean, I can't tell if it's supposed to be funny or if it's absolutely disturbing. I feel like it's probably a mixture of both, because I tell you, the way that they both flail around in there, Mazursky is struggling to try and get a hold of the job that now this guy's pretty much lost because of the drugs and all that. I tell you, it's more often than not that some people out there get caught with certain substances in their bodies, and there are tons of ways that people are actually able to find certain drugs within one's own bloodstream or within one's own mind. So it's at this point that nobody could ever escape from what's coming to them. Ever. We're always going to find things like methamphetamines, cocaine, and other substances throughout anybody's blood or anyone else. Inside whatever part of the body it might be. There's always a way to find it. But in this particular case, the fact that Mazursky is now being let go for having drugs and for having other things take place, it leads to Mazursky freaking out so bad that, well, the next scene alone is unbelievable. Mazursky basically goes in there with a group of friends and steals a TV from Johnny Truelove's house, and then takes a crap on the floor. Like, that is crazy. A guy who's on a camera ends up taking a number 2 right there on the living room floor. Like, if you think that's insane, then well, let me tell you about a few other things that take place. What happens is that the younger sibling of Jake Mazursky, Zach, ends up getting kidnapped after a bit of a day out there, pretty much getting away from the parents. But it only continues to get better from here on out. Zach basically learns, well, living a life as a dope supplier, as a drug dealer or otherwise, happens to have a lot of unique perks that set that sort of career alongside many others, but it sets way apart from many other parts of life. The reality of how our world is, and probably always will ever be, actually seems better when you're high on drugs. Of course, there were lots of ways that people might find out for themselves, but in this particular case, we have a minor who has essentially been kidnapped, but is now apparently friends with the kidnappers. Like, that's insane. Beyond trust. But the real crazy thing is the ending to this entire film. After all the time that the police are around, trying to find the missing Zach Mazursky, with Jake alongside and with many others, well, it gets to a point where Zach is eventually taken out to some mountain on the outskirts of the city in Los Angeles and ends up getting tied up, gagged, and then shot to death by an SMG. Like, that is unbelievable. They end up having to kill off their own hostage just because the police were involved at the time. Like, I don't really know about you, but there really are a lot of things out there that many of us would be concerned of, especially at times like this. But this is one of those cases where the hostage who doesn't even want to die, I mean, the kind of dialogue that comes out from poor Anton Yelchin is just insane. Like, the kind of drama right there, I mean, that would be more than enough to force a shooter to pretty much stand down and hold their fire. But you know what? I tell you, it does pretty much go off as far as to give us that sort of true story by giving us text saying that the majority of the criminals that were involved in the kidnapping of Zach ended up being sentenced to death, whereas Johnny Truelove, the ringleader of the entire operation, had actually moved out of the country, but then was eventually caught a few years later and also charged with murder and all that, and was sentenced to death, pretty much. It gives out quite a conclusifying, horrific ending that just proves anything could happen out there in reality. And this film is utterly disturbing, but I probably wouldn't have it any other way. To explain something in a rather satirical way means that as much seriousness needs to be offered, then we certainly have quite a product to look for. Alpha Dog from 2006 really is quite a unique piece out there. Even though it's disturbing, even though it's rather harsh, dark in tone, and unpredictably dangerous to most minds out there, especially ones who are younger and probably don't even understand what's happening. Well, you know what? In my case, being that I was able to see something like this, I tell you, there's definitely a lot of other films like this nowadays, but something like this, Alpha Dog, at least for having a good cast, a unique premise, and a pretty gritty way to explain the story of, well, partially based off of a real life event, I'd say the score that I might give this is probably going to have to be probably no more than, I'd say, a 7.3 out of 10. So, other people out there might rate it a little lower than that, but in this case, at least for something that was actually successful in the box office at the time, and for also having a lot of unique premises and ideas and merits that are indeed aligned within this exact genre. 7.3 is probably going to cut it based on my official scoring that I'm going to have to give to this. And in terms of other films out there, I will have a few others along the way very soon. But if you want to see more, go down to my channel, then make sure that you like, subscribe, comment, follow me on social media, and stay on the Hollywood side.